The Galactic Council had one rule that every species in the known universe followed without question. Stay away from Drethys Prime. Don't go near it. Don't even think about it. The planet had been marked as a death zone for 1,000 years, and there was a very good reason for that. At the top of its highest mountain, wrapped in chains made from collapsed stars, was something that had once burned 3 entire star systems to ash. A dragon named Volcanith. Captain Jake Morris had heard the stories, of course. Every spacer had. But Jake was human, and humans had only joined the galactic community about 15 years ago. To him, the whole thing sounded like an old legend that people just kept repeating because it made them feel important. Dragons? Chains made of stars? It all seemed a bit much. That attitude changed real fast when his ship's engine exploded halfway through a routine survey mission. Jake was in the captain's chair when the whole vessel shook like a tin can in a hurricane. Alarms started screaming. Lights flickered. His co-pilot, a woman named Rachel who'd been flying ships since before Jake could walk, was already running diagnostics before he could even ask what happened. Engine core's gone, she said, her voice tight. We've got maybe 20 minutes of maneuvering thrust left, and then we're dead in space. Jake pulled up the star charts. They were in the middle of nowhere, which was exactly where you didn't want to be when your engine died. The nearest inhabited system was 3 weeks away at their current speed. They'd run out of life support long before they got there. Wait, said Tommy from the navigation station. Tommy was fresh out of the academy, still young enough to think space travel was exciting instead of terrifying. There's a planet right here. Like, really close. We could make it easy. Jake looked at the coordinates Tommy was pointing at and felt his stomach drop. That's Drethys Prime. The bridge went silent. Even Tommy, who was new, knew that name. We don't have a choice, Rachel said quietly. It's that or we all die out here. Jake stared at the planet on his screen. Barren. Rocky. Wrapped in about 1 million warning beacons that had been broadcasting "stay away" in every known language for centuries. But Rachel was right. They were out of options. All right, he said. Take us down. The moment they changed course, every alarm on the ship started going off again, but this time it wasn't their equipment. It was the warning systems around the planet itself. And then, barely 30 seconds later, they got a transmission from a massive warship that had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. The voice that came through was cold and mechanical, speaking perfect English with a translator. Human vessel, you are approaching restricted space. Divert your course immediately or you will be destroyed. Jake grabbed the comm. This is Captain Morris of the survey ship Wanderer. Our engine is dead. We're not trying to cause trouble. We just need to land and make repairs. There was a pause, and then the alien voice came back, somehow even colder than before. There are no exceptions. Turn back now. Turn back to what? Jake shouted. We're in the middle of empty space. Our ship is dying. We need to land somewhere. Another pause, longer this time. When the voice returned, it sounded almost apologetic. Almost. You have 6 hours to repair your vessel and leave the surface. If you are still on Drethys Prime after 6 hours, we will destroy you from orbit. This is not negotiable. Do not approach the mountain. Do not go near the chains. If you wake the dragon, we will consider it an act of war against the entire Galactic Council. The transmission cut off. Rachel looked at Jake with wide eyes. They're serious. I'm reading at least 12 warships up there. Heavy ones. 6 hours, Jake repeated. He looked at Tommy. How long to fix the engine? Tommy swallowed hard. If everything goes perfectly? Maybe 8 hours. If we run into any problems, could be 12. So they were stuck. They had to land on the Forbidden Planet, and they didn't have enough time to fix their ship before the aliens blew them to pieces. Jake ran a hand through his hair, thinking hard. The alien commander had said not to approach the mountain, which meant the mountain was important. Important enough that they'd kill to protect it. They crashed on the outskirts of what looked like ancient ruins at the base of the mountain. The landing was rough. Jake was pretty sure they'd broken half the systems that were still working, but at least they were down in one piece. The crew scrambled to start repairs while Jake stepped outside to get a look at where they'd ended up. The ruins were old. Like, really old. Older than anything Jake had ever seen. There were structures made of stone that seemed to shimmer in the thin atmosphere, covered in writing in languages he didn't recognize. He activated his suit's translation software, but it could only pick up fragments. Most of the languages were dead, extinct for thousands of years. What it could translate wasn't comforting. Death awaits. Turn back. Do not disturb the sleeper. the chains must hold. There were thousands of warnings, written by hundreds of different species. Jake walked through the ruins, reading piece after piece, and started to notice something strange. Every species in the galaxy seemed to be listed here. The Crethians, the Vordani, the Helix. Species Jake had never even heard of. But nowhere in all those warnings did he see a single mention of humans. Because humans hadn't existed yet when these warnings were written. They'd arrived in the galaxy so recently that whoever built this place had no idea Earth even existed. Rachel found him standing in front of a massive stone tablet covered in symbols. "Jake, we've got a problem. The engine damage is worse than we thought. We need parts we don't have." "How long?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer wouldn't be good. 10 hours minimum. Maybe longer. Jake looked up at the mountain towering above them. Somewhere up there were the chains. And the dragon. And apparently, something so dangerous that the entire galaxy had spent 1,000 years making sure no one went near it. But there was something else up there too. He could see structures near the peak, buildings that looked too sophisticated to be just decoration. If the precursors had been advanced enough to chain a dragon, maybe they'd left behind technology that could help. "Keep working on the ship," Jake said. "I'm going up the mountain." Rachel grabbed his arm. "Are you insane? You heard what they said. If you wake that thing up there, they'll kill all of us." "They're going to kill us anyway in 6 hours when we can't leave," Jake pointed out. "But if there's precursor tech up there, maybe we can find something to fix the ship faster. Or at least something to defend ourselves with. Or maybe you'll wake up a dragon that'll kill us even faster than the council will." Jake smiled, though he didn't feel particularly happy. "Then I guess I better not wake it up." He started climbing before Rachel could argue anymore. The mountain was steep, and the air was thin, but his suit helped with both problems. As he climbed higher, he kept seeing more warnings, more ancient writing, more desperate pleas from long-dead species begging anyone who found this place to turn back. But Jake kept climbing anyway, because humans were either very brave or very stupid, and he hadn't quite figured out which one applied to him yet. The climb took Jake almost 4 hours, and by the time he reached the summit, his legs were screaming and his suit's oxygen reserves were running low. But none of that mattered the second he saw what was waiting for him at the top. The dragon was real. Jake had half convinced himself during the climb that this whole thing was just an elaborate hoax, that maybe the galaxy had quarantined this planet for some other reason and made up a scary story to keep people away. But no. There it was, coiled in the center of a massive crater that looked like it had been carved specifically to hold it. Volcanith was easily the size of a skyscraper, maybe bigger. Its scales were black, but not the kind of black you see in normal shadows. This was the black of deep space, of the void between stars. The kind of black that seemed to swallow light. And it was covered in chains. The chains wrapped around the dragon's body in dozens of places, glowing with a faint blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. They looked almost delicate from a distance, but as Jake got closer, he could see each link was thicker than his entire body. The metal they were made from didn't look like any material he recognized. It seemed to shimmer and shift, like it existed in more than 3 dimensions. Jake thought the dragon was dead at first. It wasn't moving, wasn't breathing that he could see. Just lying there like some massive statue someone had built and then abandoned. He took a few careful steps closer, his boots crunching on the rocky ground. That's when the eye opened. It was golden, bright as a star, and it fixed on Jake with an intensity that made him forget how to breathe. He felt something press against his mind, like someone was trying to crack open his skull and look inside. The pressure was enormous, crushing. Jake's knees buckled and he dropped to the ground, gasping. In that moment of contact, he felt everything the dragon was feeling. 1,000 years of rage. Fury so hot and deep it could melt planets. Hatred for the chains, for the species that had put them there, for every living thing that had abandoned it on this mountaintop. Pain, endless and sharp, where the chains had cut into its flesh over centuries. And loneliness. God, the loneliness was worse than all the rest combined. 1,000 years alone with nothing but its own thoughts and memories. Jake wanted to run. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to get up and scramble back down the mountain as fast as his legs would carry him. This thing was dangerous. It was ancient and powerful and absolutely furious, and he was an idiot for coming up here. But then he noticed something else. The chains weren't just wrapped around the dragon. They'd grown into it. Where metal touched scale, the flesh had tried to heal around the foreign material, creating these awful twisted scars. In some places, the chains had actually burrowed beneath the scales, disappearing into the dragon's body like parasites. This wasn't just imprisonment. This was torture. Slow, deliberate, ongoing torture that had been happening for 1,000 years. Jake had a little sister back on Earth. When she was 6, she'd gotten her arm caught in some old farming equipment on their uncle's property. Jake still remembered the look in her eyes when they'd found her, the way she'd been crying not just from the pain but from being trapped, unable to get free no matter how hard she tried. He'd stayed with her, holding her hand and talking to her while the adults worked to get her out. Looking at those chains cutting into the dragon's flesh, he saw that same trapped, desperate quality. And before he could really think about what he was doing, Jake reached out and touched one of the chains. The backlash hit him like a freight train. Energy surged through his body and threw him backwards. He flew through the air and slammed into the crater wall 20 feet away, hitting hard enough that he heard something crack in his ribs. His vision went white, then black, then white again. When it finally cleared, he was lying on his back, staring up at the sky and trying to remember how to make his lungs work. Both of the dragon's eyes were open now. Both of them were staring directly at him. "You touched the chains." The voice didn't come through his ears. It came from inside his head, rumbling through his thoughts like thunder. It was old, so impossibly old, and it carried the weight of centuries. "In 1,000 years, no one has dared to touch the chains. You are either the bravest creature I have ever met, or the most foolish." Jake coughed and tasted blood. Definitely cracked a rib, maybe two. He pushed himself up to sitting, his whole body protesting. "Probably foolish," he managed to say. "I'm pretty good at being foolish." "You are human." The dragon's massive head tilted slightly, studying him like a scientist might study an interesting bug. "I do not know this species. When were you born into the stars?" "About 15 years ago." "When you knew," the dragon repeated, and something that might have been amusement flickered through their mental connection. "Yes. So knew you do not know to fear me. So knew you have no memory of the dragon wars. So knew you have not yet learned that some chains exist for good reason." Jake finally got his breathing under control and looked up at the creature. "Are you going to kill me?" "I am considering it," Volcanith said, and Jake couldn't tell if it was joking or not. "You should not be here. The council will destroy you for approaching me. They will destroy your ship and everyone on it. You have doomed your crew by coming to this place." "We were already doomed," Jake said. "Our engine's dead. We had to land somewhere, and this was the only planet in range. The council gave us 6 hours to fix our ship and leave, but we don't have the parts we need. So we're stuck here whether they like it or not." The dragon was quiet for a long moment, those golden eyes never leaving Jake's face. "You climbed this mountain knowing you might die. Why?" Jake thought about lying, about making up some noble reason. But something about those ancient eyes made him think the dragon would know if he wasn't being honest. "I thought maybe there'd be technology up here. Something left over from whoever built those chains. Something that could help us fix our ship faster, or at least help us defend ourselves when the council comes to blow us up. And instead you found me." "Yeah. Instead I found you." Jake looked at the chains again, at the way they cut into the dragon's flesh. "Can I ask you something? Why are you chained? What did you do?" The dragon's laugh was like an earthquake. The whole mountaintop shook, and rocks tumbled down into the crater. "What did I do? I said no. I refused to be a slave. I fought for my freedom and won it, and then they called me a monster for daring to resist." Jake frowned. "That's not what the stories say. The stories say you destroyed 3 star systems full of innocent people." "The stories," Volcanith said, and now there was real bitterness in its voice, "were written by the victors. Yes, I destroyed 3 star systems. But they were not innocent. They were slave colonies, worked by species the precursors had conquered. I freed them. And for that crime, I have spent 1,000 years in these chains." Up in orbit, Jake's suit computer beeped a warning. The alien warships were moving into attack positions. Time was running out, both for him and for his crew down below. He should go. He should leave this creature here and get back to his ship and spend whatever time they had left trying to come up with a plan that didn't end with all of them dying. But he didn't move. He just sat there in the crater, looking at this ancient, furious, lonely thing that the galaxy had decided was too dangerous to exist. "I believe you," Jake said quietly. Both of Volcanith's eyes widened slightly, and for just a second, the crushing mental pressure eased. "Why? You do not know me. You have no reason to trust my words over the official history of the council." Jake shrugged, and immediately regretted it when his broken ribs sent a spike of pain through his chest. Because nobody tortures the villain for 1,000 years. They just kill them and move on. But someone they are afraid of? Someone they want to use? That's who they keep alive and chained up where nobody can find them. The dragon stared at him for what felt like forever. Then, slowly, it began to smile. Volcanith's smile was terrifying, all sharp teeth and ancient hunger, but Jake forced himself not to look away. The dragon seemed to appreciate that, because the mental pressure eased up just a little bit more. You are perceptive for such a young species, the dragon said. Perhaps too perceptive for your own good. Most beings prefer comfortable lies to dangerous truths. Jake shifted, trying to find a position where his ribs didn't feel like they were stabbing him. Yeah, well, I'm about to die anyway when the council blows up my ship. Might as well know what I'm dying for. Would you like to see the truth, then? Volcanith asked. The real history, not the sanitized version they teach in their schools? I warn you, human. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And knowing the truth may not save you. It may only make your death more bitter. Jake looked down at the chains again, at the way they pulsed with that eerie blue light. Show me. The dragon's eyes flared brighter, and suddenly Jake wasn't on the mountaintop anymore. He was standing on a planet he didn't recognize, watching a city burn. But it wasn't Volcanith doing the burning. It was massive machines, geometric and cold, operated by beings that looked almost like tall, thin humans but weren't quite right. The precursors. They were rounding up people, families, children, and loading them onto transport ships. Anyone who resisted was killed on the spot. The vision shifted. Now Jake was inside one of those transport ships, crammed in with hundreds of other beings. They were being taken to work camps, massive industrial complexes where slaves mined rare elements from the planet's core. The conditions were brutal. People died every day from exhaustion, from accidents, from guards who decided someone wasn't working hard enough. Another shift. Jake saw the precursors had found something, a massive creature sleeping in the heart of a star. They'd pulled it out, wrapped it in those star metal chains, and started draining its power to fuel their empire. The creature was young then, smaller, but Jake recognized it. Volcanith. The dragon had been a prisoner long before it ever fought back. They used me for 500 years, Volcanith's voice echoed through the vision. Drained my essence to power their ships, their weapons, their cities. I was not yet old enough to break free. I could only endure and wait and grow stronger. The visions kept coming, faster now. Jake saw Volcanith finally breaking its chains, saw the dragon's rage as it tore through precursor facilities. But the dragon wasn't just destroying things randomly. It was targeting the slave camps, the transport ships, the machinery of oppression. Everywhere Volcanith went, slaves were freed. Then came the 3-star systems everyone talked about. Jake saw what really happened there. They weren't peaceful worlds. They were the heart of the precursor empire, massive factory planets where millions of slaves worked until they died. Volcanith had given the slaves warning, had opened portals to evacuate anyone who wanted to escape. But the systems themselves? The dragon had burned them to ash, making sure the precursors could never rebuild their empire. I destroyed their ability to enslave others, Volcanith said. I thought I was a hero. I thought the species I had freed would thank me. The vision shifted one last time. Jake saw the aftermath. The freed species were terrified, traumatized. The precursors had spent generations telling them that dragons were monsters, that Volcanith specifically was a force of pure destruction. And when people are scared enough, they believe what they are told. The newly freed species had banded together, hunted Volcanith down, and used the same chains the precursors had created to bind the dragon once more. But this time, they didn't just chain it. They put it on this remote planet and declared it forbidden. And then, in secret, they'd done something worse. The vision zoomed down through the mountain, beneath the crater where Volcanith lay. Jake saw enormous chambers carved into the rock, filled with technology that hummed with stolen power. The chains weren't just holding the dragon prisoner. They were slowly, constantly draining its life force and storing it in massive batteries. The council takes my energy, Volcanith said quietly. They have for 1,000 years. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, the ones who preach about freedom and justice, they all run on power stolen from me. Their ships, their cities, their precious technology. All of it fueled by my suffering. Jake came back to himself with a gasp, his head spinning. He looked at the chains with new horror, understanding now what they really were. Not just a prison. A life support system for an entire civilization, powered by torture. That's why they guard this place so carefully, Jake said, his voice shaking. Not because they are afraid you'll escape and hurt people. They're afraid you'll escape and they'll lose their power source. Now you understand, the dragon said. The galaxy needs me to be a monster. If I am not a monster, then they are. If I am not dangerous, then what they have done to me for 1,000 years is not justice. It is simply cruelty for profit. Jake's suit computer beeped again. He had maybe 20 minutes before he needed to start heading back down if he wanted any chance of reaching his crew before the bombardment started. But he couldn't move. He was too angry, too disgusted by what he'd learned. The warnings at the bottom of the mountain, he said. They don't mention humans because we weren't around when they were written. Which means we're not part of this. We didn't help chain you. We haven't been stealing your power. No, Volcanith agreed. Your species is innocent of these particular crimes. Though I suspect, given time, you would have joined in. Most species do, once they learn how convenient it is to benefit from another's pain. Jake wanted to argue, to say that humans would never do something like that. But he thought about Earth's history, about slavery and exploitation and all the times people had profited from the suffering of others. The dragon was probably right. Humans weren't any better than anyone else. They just hadn't been around long enough to prove it yet. I could free you, Jake said suddenly. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise the dragon. The chains have locks. I saw them in the vision. They're puzzles, not just brute force restraints. Someone smart enough could solve them. Yes, Volcanith said slowly. The precursors were arrogant. They believed no one would ever dare try to free me. So they made the lock solvable, as a kind of joke. A test that no one would ever take. I could take it. The dragon's laugh rumbled through the crater again, but this time it sounded different. Less bitter, more genuine. You would free me? Knowing what I am? Knowing that the moment these chains break, I could destroy your ship, your crew, everything you care about. You could, Jake admitted. But I don't think you will. I think you've spent 1,000 years alone with nothing to do but think, and I think you're tired. Tired of being angry, tired of being in pain, tired of being used. I think if someone gave you a choice, a real choice, you might choose something different than revenge. You have tremendous faith in a creature you met 20 minutes ago. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just out of other options. Jake struggled to his feet, his ribs screaming in protest. My crew is going to die in a few hours when the council bombs us. You're going to stay here in these chains for another 1,000 years, maybe longer. Or we can try something different. I can free you, and you can help us escape. And then you can decide what kind of dragon you want to be when nobody's forcing you to be anything. High above them, Jake saw the first flashes of energy weapons firing through the atmosphere. The council wasn't waiting anymore. They'd seen him talking to the dragon, and they'd decided that was enough of a threat. The bombardment was starting early. Volcanith saw it too. They will kill you where you stand, human. And then they will kill your crew. And I will remain here, as I have always been. Not if I'm fast enough with these locks, Jake said, moving toward the nearest chain. How many are there? 7 primary locks, the dragon said. And human? My name is Volcanith. If you are going to die trying to save me, you should at least know what to call me. Jake, he said, already studying the first lock. My name's Jake. And I'm not planning on dying today. The first energy beam hit the mountain 300 yards away, vaporizing rock and sending up a plume of superheated debris. Jake didn't look up. He just focused on the lock, on the complex geometric patterns that shifted and changed as he touched them. Somewhere far below, his crew was probably screaming at him over the radio, but he turned off his receiver. He needed to concentrate. The puzzle was incredibly complex, but also strangely beautiful. As Jake worked, he understood something the precursors had probably never considered. They'd made these locks to prove no one would be brave enough or foolish enough to try. But humans? Humans were really, really good at being brave and foolish at the same time. The first lock was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while someone was shooting at you. Jake's hands moved across the geometric patterns, twisting and pressing sections that glowed under his touch. The symbols kept shifting, rearranging themselves every time he thought he'd figured out the sequence. Meanwhile, energy beams were slamming into the mountain all around him, each impact closer than the last. You should run, Volcanith said, and despite everything, the dragon sounded almost concerned. I can shield you from some of the bombardment, but not all of it. If you stay here, you will die. If I leave, I die anyway, Jake said through gritted teeth, his fingers flying across the lock mechanism. At least this way I'm doing something useful. Another blast hit maybe 50 feet away, and the whole crater shook. Rocks tumbled down from the rim, bouncing past Jake's head. He didn't even flinch. He was so focused on the lock that everything else just became background noise. His sister used to make fun of him for this, the way he could tune out the whole world when he was working on a problem. She'd called it his puzzle face. God, he hoped he'd get to see her again. Something clicked. The patterns suddenly aligned, and the first lock opened with a sound like a bell being struck. Blue energy exploded outward, and one of the massive chains fell away from Volcanith's body. The dragon gasped, a sound like wind rushing through a canyon, and Jake felt a surge of something through their mental connection. Relief. Pain easing for the first time in centuries. 1 down, Jake said, already moving to the second lock. 6 to go. Jake, Volcanith's voice was different now, stronger. When I break free, the council will panic. They will throw everything they have at us. Are you prepared for that? Nope, Jake said cheerfully, his hands already working on the second puzzle. But I stopped being prepared for things about 4 hours ago, so we're just improvising now. This lock was different from the first. Where the first one had been about patterns and sequences, this one was about pressure points and timing. Jake had to press certain symbols in a specific rhythm while others were glowing. It was like playing a musical instrument he'd never seen before, except if he hit a wrong note, the lock would reset and he'd have to start over. Down below, Jake's radio crackled to life. He turned off his receiver, but apparently Rachel had overridden it remotely. Her voice came through, sharp with fear and anger. Jake, what the hell are you doing up there? The whole council fleet is going crazy. They're saying you're trying to free the dragon. That's because I am freeing the dragon, Jake said, not taking his eyes off the lock. There was a pause. Then, are you insane? Rachel, I need you to trust me on this. The dragon isn't what they told us. The whole thing is a lie. They've been using it as a power source for 1,000 years. I don't care if they've been using it as a coffee maker. Rachel shouted. You're going to get us all killed. We're already going to get killed. Jake shot back. But maybe, just maybe, if I can free Volcanith, we've got a chance. Now please, I need to concentrate. He cut the connection again. The second lock was almost solved. Just a few more sequences. The timing had to be perfect. Press, wait, press 3 symbols at once, wait, and then click. The second chain fell away, and this time the surge of energy was so strong it knocked Jake off his feet. He scrambled back up, ignoring the fresh pain in his ribs, and ran to the third lock. Volcanith was starting to move now, just small movements, but Jake could see the dragon's muscles tensing and relaxing as feeling returned to parts of its body that had been numb for centuries. The bombardment was getting worse. The council ships had moved into lower orbit, and their weapons were more accurate now. Volcanith was doing something, creating some kind of energy barrier overhead, but it was flickering and weak. The dragon didn't have enough power yet to maintain a full shield. Faster would be better, human, Volcanith said, and Jake could hear the strain in its voice. Working on it, Jake muttered, his fingers dancing across the third lock. This one was a 3-dimensional maze. The symbols weren't just on the surface of the lock, they extended into some kind of pocket dimension inside the mechanism. Jake had to trace pathways through space he couldn't see, relying on touch and instinct. It was the hardest puzzle yet, and his hands were starting to shake from adrenaline and exhaustion. A massive energy beam punched through Volcanith's weakening shield and hit the crater rim directly above them. Tons of rock came crashing down. The dragon managed to deflect most of it with a wing, but several large pieces slammed into the ground right next to Jake, missing him by inches. That was close, Jake said. They are not trying to miss anymore, Volcanith replied grimly. They have decided you are too dangerous to take alive. Great. No pressure then. Jake's fingers found the final pathway through the maze, and the third lock opened. Another chain fell away. Volcanith flexed, and the entire mountain shook. Jake could feel the dragon's power growing with each lock he opened. It was like standing next to a star that was slowly waking up. The heat, the energy, the sheer presence of it was overwhelming. Locks 4 and 5 went faster. Jake was starting to understand the precursor mindset, the way they thought about puzzles and challenges. Each lock was different, but they all had a similar philosophy behind them. They weren't meant to be impossible, just difficult enough that only someone truly determined would solve them. The precursors had never imagined someone would be desperate enough and stubborn enough to try. When the fifth chain fell, Volcanith managed to lift its head fully for the first time in 1,000 years. The dragon looked down at Jake with something that might have been respect. No one has ever done this. No one has even tried. Why are you doing this, really? Is it truly just to save your crew? Jake paused at the sixth lock, thinking about the question. Honestly? I don't know anymore. Maybe it started that way. But now I'm doing it because it's right. Because what they did to you is wrong, and someone needs to say so. Even if that someone is just a random human who doesn't know any better. The dragon made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. Then you are either the wisest being I have ever met, or the most foolish. I still have not decided which. Can't it be both? Jake asked, and went back to work. The sixth lock was almost elegant in its complexity. It required Jake to solve 5 smaller puzzles simultaneously, keeping track of multiple patterns at once. It was like playing chess on 5 different boards while someone was bombing you from orbit. But somehow, maybe because he was too tired to overthink it, Jake solved it faster than any of the others. 6 chains down. 1 to go. The final lock was directly over Volcanith's heart. To reach it, Jake had to climb onto the dragon's chest, which felt extremely weird and also slightly dangerous. But Volcanith held very still, barely even breathing, while Jake examined the last mechanism. This lock was different from all the others. It was simpler, smaller. And when Jake touched it, he understood why. It wasn't a puzzle for the hands. It was a puzzle for the mind. Images flooded into Jake's consciousness. He saw Volcanith's entire history, every moment of its long life. He saw the dragon as a child, playing among stars. He saw it captured, tortured, used. He saw its escape, its desperate fight for freedom. He saw the 1,000 years of chains and loneliness and pain. And then he saw the choice. The lock wouldn't open unless the person solving it truly understood what they were freeing. Unless they looked at everything the dragon was, everything it had done, everything it might do, and still chose to set it free. Jake looked at all of it, the good and the bad and the complicated, and he made his choice. The final lock opened. All 7 chains shattered at once, exploding into fragments of light that dissolved into nothing. Volcanith rose for the first time in 1,000 years, spreading wings that blocked out the sun. The dragon's roar shook the planet itself, and Jake felt it echo across space, felt every ship in orbit register the impossible truth. The dragon was free. And the galaxy was about to change forever. The moment the chains shattered, every alarm on every council ship started screaming at once. Jake could feel it through his connection with Volcanith, could sense the panic rippling through the fleet above them. They'd spent 1,000 years making sure this exact thing never happened, and now some random human had just undone a millennium of their careful work in about 40 minutes. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every ship in orbit opened fire at the same time. Not just at the mountain, but at Jake's crew down below, at the ruins, at anything that moved on the planet's surface. They weren't trying to capture anyone anymore. They were trying to erase all evidence that any of this had ever happened. Volcanith moved faster than Jake's eyes could follow. 1 second the dragon was standing in the crater, the next it had spread its massive wings and created a barrier of pure energy that covered the entire mountain and the valley below. The council's weapons hit the shield and simply stopped, their energy absorbed and redirected harmlessly into the atmosphere. Your crew is safe, Volcanith said, and Jake felt the truth of it through their bond. For now. Jake was still standing on the dragon's chest, holding onto a scale the size of a dinner plate to keep from falling off. What happens now? Now. Volcanith's voice carried an edge of dark amusement. Now I show them what they have created. The dragon's presence exploded outward, not physically but mentally. Jake felt it rush past him like a tidal wave, reaching out to touch every single mind in the council fleet. Thousands of aliens, from dozens of different species, all suddenly connected to Volcanith's consciousness. And the dragon showed them everything. Not just what had happened to it, but what their governments had done. The secret batteries beneath the mountain. The energy theft that had been going on for centuries. The way their leaders had profited from torture while preaching about justice and civilization. Volcanith laid it all bare, forcing them to see the truth they'd been protected from. Jake felt the moment the truth hit. Felt the shock, the disbelief, the slowly building horror as crew members across the fleet realized what their civilizations had done. Some rejected it immediately, convinced it was a trick. But others, the ones who'd always had doubts, the ones who'd wondered why the dragon was kept alive instead of killed, they believed. And they were furious. On the bridge of the lead Crethean warship, a commander named Vex was having the worst day of his life. He'd woken up that morning expecting a routine patrol of the quarantine zone. Instead, he'd watched a human climb a forbidden mountain, free an ancient dragon, and potentially start a war that would reshape the entire galaxy. And now, half his crew was refusing to follow orders. "Sir, I cannot in good conscience fire on the human vessel, his weapons officer said, her voice shaking. Not after what we just learned. They didn't do anything wrong. We did. The dragon is manipulating you. Vex shouted. It's showing you lies to turn you against the council. Then explained the energy readings from beneath the mountain, his science officer said quietly. I've been monitoring them since we arrived. There are massive power collectors down there, just like the dragon showed us. They're real, sir. Which means the rest of it might be real too. Similar conversations were happening on ships across the fleet. Some crews mutinied on the spot. Others descended into arguments and chaos. But a few, the ones whose commanders were true believers or who had too much to lose if the truth came out, kept following orders. And the worst of them was Commander Vex. If the rest of you won't do your duty, I'll do it myself, Vex snarled. He locked everyone else out of the ship's controls and set a course directly for the mountain. If he couldn't destroy the dragon with weapons, he'd ram it with his entire dreadnought. At least that way, he'd die a hero instead of living as a traitor. Jake saw the massive ship break formation and accelerate toward them. Volcanith? We've got incoming. I see it, the dragon said calmly. Hold on, human. Jake barely had time to grab onto the scale tighter before Volcanith moved. The dragon didn't fly, exactly. It was more like it folded space around itself and simply appeared in a different location. One moment they were on the mountain, the next they were in orbit directly in front of the incoming dreadnought. The ship was enormous, big enough to carry thousands of crew members and pack enough firepower to level a city. It was accelerating at full speed, intent on turning both Jake and Volcanith into a crater. Volcanith reached out with one clawed hand and caught it. Just reached out and stopped a ship that massed probably 1,000,000 tons, brought it to a complete halt like it weighed nothing at all. The dragon held it there, suspended in space, while Vex frantically tried to activate the self-destruct sequence. No, Volcanith said simply, and every system on the ship shut down. You will not take your crew with you in your rage. You will not turn them into martyrs for a lie. Then, gently, incredibly gently considering the dragon could have crushed the ship like a tin can, Volcanith set the dreadnought down on the planet's surface near Jake's crew. Far enough away to not be threatening, close enough that the crew could evacuate safely if they wanted to. Jake's radio crackled. Rachel's voice came through, shaky but alive. Jake? Was that you who just parked a battleship in our backyard? That was Volcanith, actually, Jake said. You okay down there? Physically? Yeah. Mentally? I'm gonna need so much therapy after this. Please tell me you have a plan for what happens next. Jake looked at the dragon, who was currently hovering in space surrounded by a fleet that was mostly in chaos. Working on it. Volcanith opened a communication channel to every ship, every station, every planet in range. When the dragon spoke, its voice carried to millions of beings across the sector. I have spent 1,000 years in chains. 1,000 years dreaming of freedom and revenge. I have imagined, in great detail, all the ways I could make those who imprisoned me suffer. The galaxy held its breath. But this human, Volcanith continued, and Jake felt the dragon's attention focus on him warmly, this fragile, foolish, brave human showed me something I had forgotten. He saw my chains and called them wrong. He looked at a creature he'd been told was a monster and chose to see a person in pain instead. He risked everything, asked for nothing, and gave me back my freedom. The dragon's wings spread wider, catching the light of the distant sun. If such beings now walk among the stars, beings who choose compassion over fear, who risk themselves for strangers, who challenge injustice even when it would be easier to look away, then perhaps this galaxy has earned another chance. Perhaps it has finally grown beyond the fear and lies that have poisoned it for so long. Volcanith turned to address the council ships directly. I will not have my revenge. I will not burn your worlds or destroy your civilizations. But neither will I allow you to continue profiting from slavery. The batteries beneath the mountain will be destroyed. The energy you have stolen will be returned to me. And you will tell your people the truth about what was done in their names. Some ships began transmitting agreement immediately. Others hesitated, their commanders clearly torn between doing what was right and protecting their own positions. And a few, a stubborn few, still refused to accept it. But the tide had turned. The truth was out, spreading across communication networks faster than anyone could stop it. Within hours, protests would begin on council worlds. Within days, governments would start falling. The galaxy was changing, whether its leaders wanted it to or not. Jake's crew managed to get their engine working with parts salvaged from the crashed Crethean dreadnought. It turned out that when you saved an ancient dragon, said dragon was more than happy to help you loot the ship of the guy who tried to kill you. Volcanith even improved the engine design, incorporating some tricks that wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years. A week later, Jake stood at the summit of the mountain one last time. The batteries had been destroyed, the stolen energy returned. Volcanith looked healthy already, scales gleaming, wings strong. The dragon could leave anytime it wanted now. Could fly off to anywhere in the universe and never look back. But Volcanith had chosen to stay, at least for a while. The dragon had announced its intention to teach again, the way its kind had done in the ancient days before the precursors. And it had chosen humans as its first students. Why us? Jake had asked. We're new, inexperienced. We barely understand how the galaxy works. Exactly, Volcanith had replied. You are new enough to not be corrupted by the old lies. Young enough to learn better ways. And brave enough to do what is right even when it is dangerous. These are the qualities that matter. Now, preparing to leave, Jake looked out at the stars and thought about everything that had changed. The council was in shambles, but something better was already forming in its place. Species that had been enemies were talking to each other, sharing the truth about their histories. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was honest in a way the galaxy hadn't been for a very long time. Thank you, Volcanith said quietly. For seeing me. For freeing me. For reminding me what I wanted to be before the chains taught me to hate. Jake smiled. Thank you for not eating me when I touched your chains. That could have gone really differently. The dragon's laugh rolled across the mountain like thunder, warm and genuine. Indeed it could have. But then I would have missed the chance to see what happens next. And I think, human, that what happens next will be very interesting indeed. Jake headed back to his ship, where Rachel and Tommy and the rest of his crew were waiting. They had a galaxy to explore, and for the first time in 1,000 years, they'd be exploring it with the blessing and friendship of a dragon. Above them, Volcanith spread its wings and roared a challenge to the stars. The age of chains was over. The age of truth had begun. And it had all started because one human had looked at something terrifying and chosen to see someone worth saving instead. Sometimes, the most human thing you could do was reach out and touch what everyone else feared. And sometimes, just sometimes, that changed everything.